The UK at the moment is at a complete and utter standstill due to all of the issues with the unions, the RMT. The challenge that we have at the moment is that the union really needs to be careful for a number of reasons. Now, I'm not a big fan of unions in the first place. I'll hold my hands up to that, but I'll try and make this as balanced as possible. Where we are in 2022 is that there's a lot of shady stuff going on around the world. We've come out of, well, I say we've come out of a pandemic. We're probably still in it, to be fair. There's a lot of issues. We have seen lockdowns. We have seen a virus sweep around the world. We've seen people willingly stay in their own homes for various reasons because they're getting told to do so. And as a result of that, people are being handed out free currency. I'm not going to say money because there's a difference between money and currency. People have been handed out a lot of free currency. Now, I speak from a UK point of view, but this is a worldwide thing as well. So a lot of currency has been handed out. Now, as a result of that, because people have been locked down, the level of goods and services, etc., they haven't increased as such. Everything's gone in the opposite direction. There's now too much currency chasing too few goods and services. And because you're printing so much currency, that means that you're devaluing the very currency itself. So that has created inflation. Surprise, surprise. Now, as a result of that, everything's gone a bit Pete-tong. It's all gone a bit wrong worldwide. I won't get started on Russia or Ukraine. That's a different conversation. But we're looking at the rail strikes. We're looking at the RMT. We're looking at trade unions. Now, in the UK, yes, there's been a lot of historical challenges with transport, especially railways. Nationalisation, privatisation, and then this funky blend that we've had of the both since the mid-90s. However, my question is, are the unions shooting themselves in the foot? Now, I love railways, I love traveling on the trains. I love traveling on the railways. I like going up and down. I don't mind if the prices go up a couple of percent each year. There's always rail cards and various bits and pieces that you can purchase in order to make rail travel as cheap as possible. So I have no issue with the railways. I'm pro railways. I love the railways. It's my preferred method of transport, 100% of the time. If I can get somewhere by train, I'll go by train. So I just want to point that out, just in case you think I'm here bashing the railways. The challenge is, though, are the unions shooting themselves in the foot? Now, this week, or the time of recording, most people up and down the country have gone on strike. London Underground have gone on strike as well. Most train drivers, and we're just going to look at the train drivers here, I think earn about £50,000 a year, just under, on average. Now, I don't know about you. That sounds like that's a lot more than a nurse would earn, a lot more than a teacher would earn. Are their jobs more stressful? Yeah, in some circumstances, yes. In some circumstances, no. The challenge that unions have got is that they seem to, every time they don't like something or something doesn't quite go their way, it's strike, 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 strike. Under Bob Crow, under Mike Lynch, I think it is this time. Strike, 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 strike. The challenge you have with the rail industry at present is going back from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties. The primary people that would use the railways, commuters, either going into London, out of London, or getting to Manchester, various places up and down the UK. The primary source would be commuters. Now, given we've had all these experiments with lockdowns and everything like that, what's happened is that actually the amount of people commuting has gone down significantly. I don't know the exact percentage, but it's gone down. And the amount of people that are taking the railways for leisure purposes is increasing again. So you've now got this semblance where actually the main source of people that are commuting, so the main source of people that are using the railways are actually doing it for leisure purposes. So the demographics as such have changed. Now, let's just say that you're not a railway user. You don't use the railways that often, and you live in Brighton and you want to go to London. Well, chances are you're not going to drive there. Chances are you could get the coach, absolutely, or you could get the train. It's an hour there or thereabouts to central London, whether it's Victoria, or London Bridge, that area, about an hour, give or take. So absolutely fine. Perfect. Now, you're a casual user. If you're a leisure user, what are you going to do? You're probably going to be working in the week anyway, and then use the railways at the weekend. But every time you go and use the railways, everyone's striking. What's the point? What are you going to do? If that happens once, you might go, oh, okay, it is what it is. If that continuously happens, or they're doing engineering works or whatever, if you're not a railway enthusiast or you don't use the railways regularly, you're probably going to find a different way to get there. You might get a taxi, you might get a bus, you might cycle if you really wanted to. The challenge is that if you don't use the railways that often, and you're then not given a good first impression or second impression of the railways, your chances are that's it, that customer's lost forever. This is the challenge that's facing the RMT. Now, they are saying that we must have wage increases in line with inflation. Okay, I understand that. I think everyone would like that. Unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in, but I understand where you're coming from. Again, train drivers earning around about 50,000 a year. How much sympathy are we going to have for them? If a nurse is on 22, 23,000 a year and they decide to strike, then we've got a bigger issue. I have to say that'll be a much bigger issue if that happens. I think there'll be a lot more sympathy there than train drivers and train people on strike. Here's the challenge in itself. The good old RMT are shooting themselves in the foot. Why? They want assurances around job security. Again, I understand that. Everyone would like that, but we don't live in a static world. The world is always changing. The world's a very dynamic place. Technology is always improving. You're not going to be stuck in, this life forever. Supply demand levels of the railway, they're changing. Again, we've just gone through that. Leisure travelers are increasing. Commuters, not so much. They've had a big dip off after the last few years. Yes, there are going to be people that are going to need to commute. I get that. There's a lot more leisure people out there nowadays. And most people, not saying everyone, most people would have come out the last couple of years with all the stuff that we've been through, and most people would have come out in a worse situation. Have railway workers come out in a worse situation? Probably not all of them. And again, if you're on 50 grand a year, it can be a bit difficult to be super sympathetic, to be honest with you. Government wants savings. Understandable. If it's the railways that cost them an arm and a leg, they're going to want to cut that spending down. The challenge is, if the RMT keeps striking and the railways aren't open, then your revenue is going to decrease. If your revenue decreases and then you're pushing the demand away, well, what's going to happen? Well, it's a bit of a no-brainer. A 3-year-old can tell you this. You're basically, demand's going down, and if supply's still the same or whatever, if demand goes down, the price will go up, because then you need to sort of offset the loss in demand with higher prices. But of course, if you've got an offset in demand, what will happen to the supply? Well, if less people are using the trains, you might not need to run as many services. If you don't need to run as many services, chances are what will happen is that if you get less services, you're going to need less drivers. You might need less people on the station platforms. You might need less people that work in the ticket office. You might possibly need less people to maintain the rails because they're not getting used as much. I don't know that. That's just a guess. So if the RMT keep deciding to strike at the first available opportunity, actually, what are they achieving? I'm going to guess that most people that are in the RMT are going to get what I like to call golden pensions anyway. If they don't, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot anyway, pension-wise, because ultimately you've got to look after yourself at the end of the day. Don't rely on the government to look after you. They ain't going to do it. So if they haven't already got a golden pension plan as such, then they're banking on the same government to provide all these pensions when they retire. Pensions might not exist in 15 years' time, given the way everything is at the moment. I don't know. It's a possibility. The whole thing could go collapse. But secondly, by driving people away from the railways, and again, bear in mind there's more leisure travellers, give or take, at the moment. If you're creating a really bad first impression, what you get? These people won't use the railways again. They'll find a different method of transport, absolutely, because the railways to them won't be reliable. If they're not reliable, they're not going to get used. If they're not going to get used, what will happen, again, is that demand will decrease. So if demand decreases, your supply doesn't have to remain the same. Your supply could probably also decrease as well. Now that could lead to job losses, or because people are striking over, unfair conditions, and we want more pay, and we want this, and we want that. Absolute insanity, if you ask me. Absolute insanity. So you've got to be careful what you wish for. I would say, if you listen to this, your RMT, your trade union, you're striking, for the railways, etc., you have to be very careful what you're wishing for. Technology is not always going to be the answer to everything. Okay, technology will help to improve certain aspects of life. It will help to improve certain aspects of the railway. Absolutely, you're always going to need an element of people power in the railways to maintain rails, to maintain tracks, to drive trains. In my opinion, you're always going to need that. The challenge that you've got is that you are pushing away the very people that are using the railway. And as a result of that, what will happen is that demand will decrease, supply will then have to be altered with, either prices go sky high to compensate for the loss of demand, or you then can start limiting supply. If you start limiting supply, congratulations, you need less people to do the job in the first place. Therefore, if you're trying to run a business or you're trying to run a railway, if your revenues decrease, your demand decreases, your revenues decrease, what are you going to do? You're going to try and factor in ways to be as cost effective as possible. That might be through technology, that might be through laying people off. It could be through a mixture of both and a number of other things. So congratulations, RMT. Just be very, very careful what you wish for. When demand for the railways decreases, because you're dealing with a lot of leisure travelers nowadays, do not be surprised when people start getting let off, because you have shot yourselves in the foot. Just be careful what you wish for.